Hello, I'm Sam Milazzo, member of the International Wizard of Oz Club since 2008. I live in Sydney, Australia, and well, long story short of how I came to love Oz. Yes, so from all that, I eventually did a lot of pictures, storybook illustration opportunities. So I am a freelance illustrator and artist working on expanding my portfolio. Um, in celebration of 50 years of Oziana, the story I will be reading for you will be A Bungled Kidnapping in Oz by David Hulan from the 2004 issue. David Hulan has particular experience writing about the cats of the Emerald City as the author of The Glass Cat of Oz by Emerald City Press and Eureka in Oz, Red Hen Publications, which was published online. So, here we go. A Bungled Kidnapping in Oz by David Hulan, with illustrations by John Munt, Esquire. Please note that this story takes place between the events of The Lost Princess of Oz and The Tin Woodman of Oz. During the day and early evening, the streets of the Emerald City are as busy and merry as you would expect in the capital of the happiest fairyland in or out of this world. But its citizens take the one great law, behave yourself, very seriously, and are almost always settled in their homes long before midnight. Even in Oz, however, cats behave very much as they choose. Although the clock on the stable tower of Ozma's palace was striking 2 in the morning, it would have surprised no one to see Bungle, the glass cat, and Eureka, the pink kitten, trotting side by side past the sleeping sentry through the great south gate into the palace grounds. "You need to be more colourful," the kitten was saying. "Now, I've got a lovely coat of pink fur to go with my bright blue eyes, and between them I'm admired by everyone at court. You, on the other hand, are a colourless character." "I'm not," the transparent cat retorted. "I have emerald eyes and a ruby heart to add colour, and you can't deny that I have the clearest complexion in Oz." "Yes, but what's that?" the glass cat interrupted. "Someone's climbing the wall outside Ozma's window." It was a dark night, and a human might have missed the greater darkness against the ivied wall, but the two cats had no trouble seeing a shadowy figure making its way up the vines. They knew no good reason why anyone should be doing that. They both remembered how Ugu the shoemaker had kidnapped Ozma only a few months earlier and thrown all Oz into confusion until she was found again. "Get help, Eureka," the cat said quickly. "I'll try to delay whoever it is." Eureka sprang into an open window on the ground floor and raced up the stairs while Bungle followed the mysterious figure up the ivy toward the window of Ozma's bedroom. The princess's fairy senses must have warned her of the intruder. She was rising from her bed as he swung his legs through the window. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Leave my room immediately, or I'll call my—" The interloper blew a sparkling pink powder from her tube at Ozma. "Freeze now," he said with a mystic gesture. The fairy ruler stood motionless, with one arm pointing at him. He swung a long cape off his shoulders and was about to wrap it around the princess when 20 pounds of glass landed on his back and attached itself with needle-sharp claws. "Yow!" The intruder twisted his free arm around to grab at the snarling, scratching glass cat, but Bungle was fast and angry. She flicked her tail out of his reach and put another line of scratches on his left cheek. She sprang down on the floor, up onto a chair, and then onto his chest. The intruder was forced to drop the cloak, so that he could protect his eyes. The cat got in a swipe on his right cheek before he grabbed her neck. Even then, her hind claws took a toll on his hand as he hurled her across the room. Fortunately for Bungle, her landing was cushioned by the thick draperies of the archway between Ozma's bedroom and dressing room. The intruder had just picked up his cape when she sprang back into the fray. The best he could do was to swing his cape toward her and tangle her in its folds. Holding Bungle through the cloth, he looked around desperately. Catching sight of the marble top of Ozma's dresser, he raised the struggling bundle high over his head. With all his strength, he started to bring it down, intending to shatter the glass cat against the stone surface. But as he started his downward motion, a strong hand caught at the flowing end of the cape and yanked it backward. He fell onto the floor, losing his grip. Before the intruder could recover, a tall man with shaggy hair and a shaggy beard, even shags and bobtails on his pajamas, had wrapped him in his own cape and was sitting on him. The cat hissed at him and gave his long nose one final rake with her claws. "He cast some kind of spell on Ozma," she said. "Is the wizard coming?" "He should be," replied the shaggy man. "Eureka found me first, but she was going to get the wizard next, and then Uncle Henry and Omby Amby." He shook the intruder and continued, "Who are you? What are you trying to do?" The prisoner clamped his lips together. Before the shaggy man could say anything further, a bald-headed little old man in striped pajamas and a dressing gown rushed in, carrying a black bag. "Oh, good," said the wizard. "You've captured him. But what's this?" He looked at Ozma in dismay. "He blew some kind of powder onto her, and she froze stiff," Bungle said. "I hope you know how to break the spell." The wizard muttered. "This isn't the kind of spell that Glinda or I like to use, but I don't think it could be very complicated. This intruder seems hardly more than a boy." The others took their first chance to look closely at their foe. He happened to be somewhere in his teens. No one in Oz ever needed to grow any older, but this had become true for most Ozites only quite recently. Someone who looked so young was unlikely to be very old. At this point, Eureka entered the room, closely followed by a sturdy old farmer and a one-legged old sailor. "The three of you should be able to hold him still and keep him from doing any more harm," the wizard said. "Don't let him move his hands. Let's get him onto his feet so I can search him. If I can find out what he used to work his spell, I can probably break it." The shaggy man gripped the intruder's arms firmly through his cape and lifted him to his feet. Then Captain Bill took his right arm and Uncle Henry his left, while the wizard searched his pockets. "Those are nasty scratches you've got there, lad," the old sailor chuckled. "Fall in the thorn bush, did you?" "You're right lucky they missed your eyes," Uncle Henry added. "I wish I had scratched his eyes out," the glass cat spat. "First he enchanted Ozma, then he tried to smash me." "And I wish I had smashed you, you horrid animal!" The intruder spoke for the first time, glaring at his captors and especially at Bungle. Just then the wizard pulled a small envelope from one of the young man's pockets. After examining its contents, he gave a nod of satisfaction. "As I suspected, it's Rosa Runedick dust. Harmless enough most of the time, but the right words and gestures can give it certain magical properties. I believe my handbook of wizardry here has the counterspell." He took a compact book in a green leather binding from his dressing gown pocket and leafed through it. Meanwhile, other residents of the palace, drawn by the unusual movements in the corridors, began to crowd into the room. "Oh, Ozma!" Dorothy cried in distress when she saw her friend's condition. She ran over and put her arms around the ruler, weeping when she felt how rigid she was. "Who did this to you?" "It's all right, Dorothy, dear," Uncle Henry said soothingly. "The wizard says he knows how to break the spell, and she'll be fine in a jiffy." Dorothy's tears ceased, but she continued to sniffle as the wizard found the correct page. He nodded and said, "Unfreeze now," with a gesture not too different from the one the intruder had used. "Guards!" Ozma finished, then blinked. She shook her head, then looked in wonderment at all the people standing in her bedroom. "What happened?" happened? Where did everyone come from? You were under an enchantment, my dear, the wizard said. This young man climbed into your window. I remember that, Ozma interrupted, and used some rosa runic dust to freeze you in place. Luckily, Bungle and Eureka saw him climbing the wall, and Eureka brought help while Bungle attacked him and distracted him until the Shaggy Man arrived and captured him. I thank you both from the bottom of my heart, Ozma said, kneeling down and stroking both cats. If there is any reward I can give either of you, you have only to ask. I already have all the cream I can eat, Eureka said lazily. I can't think of anything else I want, but if I do, I'll be sure to let you know. The glass cat hesitated before saying, There is one thing I'd like. For your courage in helping me, you may have it, whatever it may be, as long as it harms no one. Well, you remember when I first came to the Emerald City a few years ago, I had pink brains that I was very conceited about. Yes, and at your own request, the wizard had made them transparent, and you became much more humble, the princess agreed. Well, it's completely unnatural for a cat to be humble, so if you don't mind, I'd like to have my brains turned to pink again. Perhaps I won't be as conceited about them as I once was, but at least I can be proud of them. You've earned that, Ozma said with one of her delightful smiles. Even if you become conceited again, we can all remember your bravery and forgive you for it. Wizard? The wizard took a hood-like instrument out of his black bag and placed it over Bungle's head. He closed the switch on it, producing a bright flash. When he removed the hood, the cat's brains were as pink and active as they had been before he had made them transparent. Bungle trotted over to a mirror and gazed into it with satisfaction. Look at that, Eureka! You can see him work again! So who cares? The kitten yawned, and curled up in front of the fireplace to watch what happened next. Now, said Ozma, confronting the intruder, who are you, and what were you trying to do? The lad clamped his lips together and refused to speak. I know who he is. A reedy voice came from the back of the room. Professor H. M. Wogglebug, T.E., stepped forward with his usual pompous trade. He has changed somewhat in appearance in the years since I first knew him, but unfortunately his nature has not changed at all. He was a bad boy then, and he seems to be a bad youth now, the prisoner said back in puzzlement. I never knew you, he said. I couldn't forget such a big ugly bug. No, said the professor. When I knew you, I was only a tiny wogglebug, although I must say I was considered quite a handsome one by the other members of my species. But while I was living in Hearth at Professor Know-it-all's school, drinking thirstily of the ever-flowing fountain of limpid knowledge there offered, you were one of his pupils, and all the insects who lived around the school were in mortal fear of one Jommy Zelv, you. Hey, they were just bugs, the lad protested, turning a shade paler. Just bugs? The professor demanded in outrage. And have we insects no rights? Have we no feelings? Here in Oz, many of us have the gift of speech, and while I'm the only Wogglebug to become so thoroughly educated, I'm sure that many of my kin could have benefited from the good professor's lectures if they'd wanted to. Yet you, he shook a fist under the intruder's badly scratched nose, you spent much of your time capturing poor innocent insects, tearing off their wings and legs, impaling them on cruel pins for your collection, and otherwise spreading terror and destruction among us. You, sir, are an evil person. The professor could see the other citizens surprised at such an outburst from someone normally in full control of his noble faculties. But this had not been just another thoughtless boy. Jommy Zelv had been a thoroughly bad and miserable child, miserable to be around, but clearly miserable in his own heart, doing bad things to others in an effort to make them as unhappy as he was. Although even the Wogglebug now felt some pity for the lad, he knew that something must be done about him. Now that the professor has told you who this interloper is, the glass cat said to those assembled. I can tell you what it looked like he was trying to do. When I came in the window, he was just freezing you, your highness, and he took off his cape and looked as if he was about to wrap you up in it. I'm sure that he was planning on kidnapping you, though he may have had other plans as well. The wizard interrupted. Your highness, it's still the middle of the night. I propose that I use Mrs. Zelf's own magic on him, just in case he has some other resources that I don't know of, and that we hold a formal inquiry in the council chamber in the morning. I know from experience that being frozen in that way doesn't hurt, Ozma said thoughtfully, so I'll allow it. The wizard packed a small amount of the rosa runic dust into a silver tube he took from his bag. He blew it on Johnny Zelf, saying, Freeze now! And making the required gesture, the prisoner became rigid. His captors carried him into an inner room with no windows, where they locked him in for the night. Glinda, the good sorceress of Oz, has a great book of records that records every event of importance that takes place anywhere in the world, just as it is taking place. Early every morning, Glinda reads it to see if she needs to take some action to preserve the peace and tranquility of Oz. It seemed a matter of course, then, that Glinda's magnificent swarm chariot swooped down and landed on the lawn the next morning. Ozma was just finishing breakfast on the terrace with the wizard and the three little girls who were her closest friends, Dorothy, Trot, and Betsy Bobbin. The tall, beautiful sorceress lit from the chariot and walked over to the table where the girl ruler was sitting. Another kidnapping attempt, she said. We're not certain of that yet, said Ozma, but it seems most likely. I think we can be sure enough, Glinda replied. My book of records said Dromy Zelf's attempt to kidnap Ozma was bungled. All four of the girls giggled, and even the wizard smiled more broadly than usual. Your book is being its usual cryptic self, he said, but that's certainly one way to put it. Our friend Bungle, the glass cat, was most responsible for stopping the kidnapper. Glinda smiled at this, but quickly became serious again. Ozma, dear, this is the second time in only a few months that someone has attempted to kidnap you. I know, Ozma replied. It made me sad enough to think that there was even one person in Oz who would do such a wicked thing. Now it seems that there are at least two. I'm afraid that I may have failed in my efforts to make all my subjects happy. Why, that's just silly, Ozma, Dorothy blurted. You're the best ruler Oz could possibly have. And the only people who aren't happy are those who can't be happy, unless other people are unhappy. Wisely spoken, Dorothy, the wizard said. We know that Ugo was never going to be happy unless he ruled all of Oz himself. And from what Professor Wogelbach has told us, I think Zombie Zelf is probably the same kind of unhappy person. Perhaps you're right, Ozma said with a frown. But what made either of them the sort of person he is? Could I have helped prevent that? I doubt it, Glinda said gently. We know that Johnny was a bad boy before you came to the throne, and from the stories that Khazar Rover of Herku told about Ugu, he too was terribly discontented long before your reign. If they were already unhappy people of the sort, I doubt that anything you could have done would have made them content. Ozma and the others rose from the table, and together with Glinda they went into the great council chamber. The Shaggy Man and Omby Amby brought Dromy Zelf into the room between them. When all were seated, the wizard blew another dose of Rosa Runic dust onto the youth and restored his ability to move. Dromy Zelf looked around nervously. The Shaggy Man, Omby Amby, Uncle Henry, and Captain Bill would have made it hard enough to escape, but the huge lion and tiger who glared at him from either side convinced him that he would have to obey all of Ozma's orders. Will you answer my questions now? Ozma asked. Oh, all right, he said sullenly. Why did you want to kidnap me? Well, you're so beautiful, I fell in love with you, and I knew you'd never have anything to do with me. Glinda shook her head and pointed at the great pearl that was hanging from her neck. It had been white, but as soon as Johnny had said, "I'll fall in love with you," it turned a deep black. Ozma remembered how it had done the same when Mombi had tried lying to the sorceress, back when Ozma herself had thought she was a boy called Tipitarius. "Some of what you have said is true," Glinda said. "Ozma is indeed beautiful, but the poll reveals that Johnny is not telling the truth when he says he fell in love with you. So, young man, tell us the truth now, knowing that we can detect any lies." The prisoner clamped his mouth shut again. The hungry tiger lifted one mighty forepaw and barred all its claws. "I'll tell the truth," Dromy blurted. The tiger licked his paw and gently brushed some crumbs from his face, concealing a grin. "I've been studying magic," the youth began, "and have learned some pretty good tricks. But I knew it was against the law and that sooner or later it would come to Glinda's notice. Then I heard about how Ugu had kidnapped you. I thought that if he could do it, probably could too, and that as long as I could hold you captive, nobody would dare interfere with what I was doing, and I could learn all the magic I wanted to. But we were able to rescue Ozma from Ugu, even though he'd stolen most of the magical tools in Oz," Dorothy said. "Why would you think we couldn't rescue her from you?" "Ugu was stupid," Dromy replied curtly. "He hid Ozma off in the middle of an orchard where he couldn't keep an eye on her. I was going to keep her close to me, where I could threaten to hurt her if anyone bothered me." "And you would have, you wicked boy!" exploded the Wogglebug, as most of the others drew back in dismay at this threat to their beloved ruler. "We will punish you severely for your insolence and your evil intentions." "Gently, Professor, gently," Ozma said. "You know that we never punish people for punishment's sakes. We need to make sure that he never does it again, and if possible, that he never wants to do it again. But our goal is correction, not punishment." "Johnny Zelf deserves punishment as well as correction," the professor muttered, but the princess ignored him. Ozma's friends and counselors began discussing how best to ensure that Johnny Zelf would never work magic again, and indeed would never want to work magic. The wizard offered to freeze him again with the Rosa-Rundic dust and leave him in that condition, but Ozma could not agree to that. Glinda said that she could remove his magic powers, as she had with Mombi, but that this would not prevent him from wanting to work magic, and would not prevent him from doing other wicked things. The Frogman, an ordinary frog who had eaten magical food and grown to the size of a man, stepped forward. "I bathed in the truth pond," he croaked, "and afterward have compelled to tell the truth. If Johnny were to bathe in the truth pond, he too would have to tell the truth at all times, which makes it hard to do anything very bad." Ozma was pondering this when Uncle Henry spoke up. "Talking of the truth pond reminds me of the forbidden fountain in your garden. It did a bang-up job of washing the great wickedness out of a bunch of folks that were a lot worse than this young fella. How about we make him drink from that fountain?" Anyone who drank from the forbidden fountain at once lost all his personal memories. He became like a little child, innocent of all wickedness and vain desires. "It's a serious thing to lose all one's memories," Glinda reflected, "but in this case, I believe it might serve the purpose." "Surely his memories only make him unhappy and miserable," Ozma said. "He will forget all his wickedness, just as the phantasms and growlywogs and whimsies did. We can give him a position in the palace and teach him to be a good and useful citizen of Oz. Surrounded by kind and loving friends, he will have no further wish to do wrong. Still, it is unpleasant for a person to contemplate losing all of the memories that make him what he is, even if they make him wicked and unhappy." Dromy protested strongly, but the Shaggy Man and Omby Amby marched him out into the garden, flanked by the lion and the tiger. All the others in the council chamber followed. They stopped at a beautiful fountain where sparkling water bubbled up into a golden basin. On it was a sign: "All persons are forbidden to drink at this fountain." "You wouldn't want me to break a law, would you?" Dromy pleaded. making one last attempt to escape his fate. Since I made the law, I can declare an exception to it when extreme circumstances warrant, Ozma said with finality. Drink. Dromy sighed, cupped his hands, filled them with water, and drank. Slowly, the frightened glare faded from his eyes. He looked about in childlike wonderment at the beauties of the garden and the strange and wonderful citizens of Oz who surrounded him. Take him to Julia Jam, Ozma instructed on Ombi. Tell her to assign him a room and some useful work around the palace. To give him a fresh start in life, we'll give him a new name as well. From now on, he'll be known as Zif, which means industrious in the old language. If I may make a suggestion, Professor Logobug said, young Zip will need an education since he's forgotten everything he learned from Professor Know-it-all. With your permission, I will take him on as a student at the Royal College of Athletic Arts and Sciences. He can work for me in his spare time to earn his keep. An excellent idea, Ozma said. The professor and the youth walked off together. Perhaps the Wogglebug hadn't altogether forgiven the boy, but in that case, he wasn't likely to tell Ozma. That concludes my reading of A Bungled Kidnapping in Oz by David Hulan from Oziana 2004 in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Oziana. Thank you for listening and happy anniversary. If you'd like to learn more, please join the International Wizard of Oz Club.